My parents disowned me, my sister mocked me, and 24 hours later my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. 11 missed calls, 3 voicemails, all within 20 minutes. The first one was from my father. His voice sounded thinner than it had the night before when he stood in front of our extended family and said calmly that I was no longer welcome in his house. "You need to call the bank back right now," he said. "They're asking questions." In the background, I could hear my mother crying. Not the theatrical kind, the sharp, breathless kind that comes from panic. Another voicemail followed. This one wasn't from them. It was from a senior fraud investigator at Huntington Bank. "Ms. Calloway, we need to discuss the commercial property lien filed under your name. There appears to be a discrepancy with the guarantor signature." I sat at my kitchen counter in my apartment in downtown Columbus, barefoot on cold tile. "Commercial property. Guarantor signature. That's not my signature," I said out loud to no one. The investigator's message ended with, "If this isn't resolved by end of day, the loan may be accelerated." Accelerated meant foreclosure, legal action, possibly federal review. 24 hours ago, my sister had laughed when my father told me to leave. She called me dead weight. My mother hadn't stopped her. Now they were calling me like I was the only thing holding something together. My phone buzzed again. This time my father texted, "You have to fix this. Please." "Fix what?" Before I tell you how I ended up sitting there staring at a property I'd never seen tied to my name, I want to pause for a second. If you're listening from somewhere far away, tell me where you are. I always wonder who's on the other side of stories like this. Now let me take you back 6 months to the first time I realized something in my family had started shifting. 6 months earlier, nothing had exploded yet. It was quieter than that. The kind of quiet where things are slightly misaligned, but you keep adjusting yourself instead of asking why the room feels crooked. I was still driving out to my parents' house in Westerville every other Sunday, 22 miles from my apartment. 40 minutes if traffic on I-270 cooperated. My mother still set the table with her pale blue plates. My father still asked about my job in the same half-interested tone. I worked as a compliance analyst for a regional healthcare network in Columbus. Risk reviews, documentation audits, quiet work. Invisible unless something went wrong. Tessa liked to call it spreadsheet babysitting. Her boutique in the short north had been open for 3 years. Tessa Lane Collective, white brick exterior, warm lighting. $6,800 a month in rent, which I only knew because I overheard my father muttering about it once in the garage. That was around the time the subtle shifts started. My mother began asking for copies of things she had no reason to need. "Do you still have your old passport scan? I'm reorganizing the insurance binder. Can you text me your social again? I think I wrote it down wrong for emergency contact." It was small, reasonable on the surface. I didn't argue. I sent them. Looking back, I can feel how casually I handed over pieces of myself. The humiliations were smaller, too. Manageable. Tessa would talk about real entrepreneurship while glancing at me. "Some of us build things," she said once, swirling wine in her glass. "Some of us just enforce rules." My father didn't correct her. Instead, he nodded toward her and said, "Risk takers move the world." I remember staring at the condensation sliding down my water glass and thinking how strange it was that I felt like a guest at my own table. The mail started going missing around then. I didn't notice at first. I travel occasionally for work, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, 2 or 3 days at a time. When I came back from a compliance training in Chicago in early March, there was a small stack of mail shoved halfway through my apartment door. A credit card offer, electric bill, a soft inquiry notice from Huntington Bank. Soft inquiry. I assumed it was marketing. I filed it away. 2 weeks later, my father asked me something unusual. "You ever think about investing in commercial property?" he said, while we were cleaning up after dinner. "No," I said. "I can barely keep up with rent increases." He smiled like I'd made a joke. Smart people diversify. The tone was too neutral, too rehearsed. When I asked why he was asking, he shrugged. Just curious. Later that night, Tessa announced she was considering expanding. A second location. Bigger vision, she called it. More inventory. Higher-end brands. A different demographic. My mother beamed. That's my girl. No one asked how she was financing it. No one asked what it would cost. I remember calculating in my head. Even conservatively, that kind of expansion would require at least $200,000 in capital. Inventory alone would eat half of that. I almost asked. But I didn't. Instead, I watched my father refill Tessa's wine before she even asked. Something in me began to tighten. Not anger, not jealousy. Unease. A few days later, I checked my credit score out of habit. It had dipped 12 points. Not catastrophic. Just enough to register. There was another soft inquiry listed. Commercial lending. I called the bank. They said it was likely pre-qualification activity. Pre-qualification for what? When I asked my mother if she had used my information for anything, she sounded offended. Why would I do that? It was so quick, so smooth. The doubt shifted back onto me. That's how it works in families like mine. Doubt floats to whoever asks the question. So I stopped asking, but the feeling didn't leave. It settled in my chest like something unfinished. And the next time I drove those 22 miles to Westerville, I noticed something new sitting on the kitchen counter. A folder, stamped with a bank's logo. When I walked into the room, my father closed it. Too quickly. I didn't say anything. But I felt it. Something had already been signed, and I didn't remember holding a pen. By April, Tessa's expansion was no longer hypothetical. She had a lease. East Hudson, she said casually one Sunday, as if she were announcing a brunch reservation. Up-and-coming corridor. I got in early. I knew the address immediately. 842 East Hudson Street. I had driven past it dozens of times on my way to work. Brick storefront, narrow windows. The kind of building that needed renovation before it needed inventory. That's a big step, I said. It's what growth looks like, she replied. My father lifted his glass toward her. Proud of you. I waited for the practical questions. Construction budget. Loan terms. Insurance. None came. Instead, my mother asked what color she planned to paint the interior. That was the first time I felt something sharp under the unease. Because expansion like that doesn't happen on optimism alone. It happens on financing. A week later, I received another alert from my credit monitoring service. This one wasn't a soft inquiry. It was a new account review request from a commercial lender. My stomach tightened. I called Huntington Bank again. I stayed calm. I explained that I had no active commercial applications. The representative placed me on hold. When she returned, her tone had changed. There is a pending file listing you as guarantor. For what I asked, I'm not authorized to disclose details unless you're the primary borrower. I'm listed as guarantor, I said. That makes me liable. Silence. Ma'am, I suggest you speak directly with the co-borrower. Co-borrower. The word landed heavier than it should have. That night, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. The folder was back on the counter. This time, it was open. I didn't touch it. I just stood close enough to read the top line. Commercial promissory note. I could see Tessa's name printed clearly. Below it, mine. The formatting looked official. The signature line was partially visible. I couldn't see it clearly enough to confirm. My father walked in from the garage and froze when he saw me standing there. You shouldn't just walk in like that, he said. I'm on the paperwork, I replied. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said something that felt rehearsed. It's temporary. Just until revenue stabilizes. I didn't sign anything. His jaw tightened. You agreed to support family. Support doesn't mean co-signing a $250,000 loan. He didn't answer. Tessa entered the room, then phone in hand, half smiling. Relax, she said. It's just paperwork. Dad handled it. The room felt smaller. I need to see the document, I said. You're overreacting, my mother called from the hallway. Why are you always looking for problems? Because I work in compliance, I almost said. Because I know what forged documentation looks like. But instead, I felt the familiar shift. 4 people in a room. 1 person questioning. 3 people aligning. I left without another word. 2 days later, I received a certified letter I hadn't expected. Not from the bank. From the county recorder's office. Property transfer confirmation. Grantee Marin Callaway. I stared at the address listed. 842 East Hudson Street. Transfer date 4 months earlier. 4 months. That meant the deed had been filed in February. The week I was in Chicago for work. I checked my calendar. February 14th to 16th Compliance Summit, Hyatt Regency O'Hare. Flight receipts, hotel invoices, badge scan logs. I hadn't been in Columbus. I hadn't even been in Ohio. I sat at my dining table with the letter spread in front of me and felt something settle into place. Not panic, precision. Because whatever they had done it while I was out of state. Which meant there would be timestamps, notary records, witness signatures, and signatures. That's when the humiliation turned into something colder. I wasn't just being minimized at dinner, I was being positioned. And the next time my father toasted family unity at Thanksgiving, I would already know that something in that room belonged to me. Legally, even if I had never agreed to it. For a few weeks after the deed notice arrived, nothing outwardly changed. That was almost worse. Tessa posted filtered photos of exposed brick and gold shelving on Instagram. Hudson grand opening, May 12th. The caption read, soft launch event. Live music. Champagne for the first 50 guests. My parents shared every post. I said nothing. I requested a full copy of the recorded deed from the Franklin County Recorder's office. It arrived in a thick envelope 3 days later. The signature line was there in black ink. My name, close enough to pass in a glance, wrong enough that I felt it in my throat. The M curved slightly higher than mine ever did. The final Y dipped too far below the line. It looked like someone who had practiced. I didn't confront them. Not yet. At work, I processed risk disclosures and internal compliance violations for a living. The first rule was always the same: document before you escalate. So I documented. I requested the notarization record tied to the deed filing. The notary's name was printed clearly, Ellen Parrish. I knew her. She attended my parents' church. I printed my flight confirmation from February 14th. Departure from John Glenn Columbus International at 6:10 a.m. Arrival in Chicago at 7:04 a.m. Boarding pass timestamped. The notarization time on the deed, February 14th, 9:18 a.m., Columbus, Ohio. The math didn't require interpretation. Still, the house felt deceptively normal. Easter Sunday came and went. My mother set out deviled eggs. My father carved ham. Tessa talked about vendor contracts and scaling. She referred to Hudson as our property once. I watched her correct herself. My property, she amended lightly. My father didn't look at me. At one point, my mother leaned toward me and lowered her voice. You've been distant. I held her gaze. Have I? She nodded. Family needs trust. Trust. The words settled in the center of the table like something fragile. Later that afternoon, I walked through their living room and noticed a framed photo had been moved. It used to sit on the console by the door. A picture of Tessa and me in matching blue dresses at my college graduation. It was gone. In its place was a photo of Tessa alone in front of her boutique. Small adjustments. Quiet rewrites. By early May, the Hudson location opened. I didn't attend. No one asked why. 2 weeks later, my credit score dropped again. This time not from inquiry, from utilization. A commercial line had been drawn against the loan. I called the bank and requested confirmation of guarantor liability. The representative hesitated, then said, "Yes, Ms. Calloway, you are personally guaranteeing this note. Amount $240,000. Interest rate 7.4%. Maturity 5 years." My breath didn't change. My voice didn't rise. I simply asked for the full loan package. They told me it would need to be requested in person. The next Sunday at dinner, my father raised a toast. To family unity, he said. And to standing together when it matters. The irony almost made me smile. Tessa laughed at something one of her friends said about risk tolerance, then looked directly at me. "Some people just don't have the stomach for growth," she said. "They'd rather audit from the sidelines." There it was again. Small humiliation. Measured. Polished. My mother added softly, "Not everyone understands sacrifice. Sacrifice." I finished my water and stood. "I have an early morning," I said. No one stopped me. As I drove back to my apartment in the dark, the city lights blurred slightly against the windshield. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. If the Hudson location underperformed, and retail margins were already tightening nationally, the loan would strain within months. If payments lapsed, the guarantor would absorb the default. Me. And if the documents were forged, that wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. But confronting them prematurely would give them time to adjust their story. So I did what I always did at work when something felt wrong. I waited. And I watched. Because false stability is loudest right before something cracks. The certified envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, thick, cream-colored. My name typed in clean black ink. No return address I recognized at first glance, just a law firm in downtown Columbus. I stood in my kitchen for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a notice of personal guarantee obligation. The language was clinical. "You are hereby notified that as guarantor of the commercial promissory note dated February 14th, you are jointly and severally liable for repayment of $240,000 plus accrued interest. Jointly and severally." I read the phrase 3 times. It meant they could come after me alone. Attached behind the notice was a full copy of the loan package. This time I could see everything. Borrower Tessa Calloway. Co-signer Tessa Calloway, Enterprises LLC. Personal guarantor Marin Calloway. My name appeared on 14 separate pages, initialed in the margins, signed at the bottom. Every signature almost right. Almost. The bank's cover letter stated that the loan had entered technical default due to delayed vendor payments and missed revenue benchmarks. If deficiencies were not cured within 30 days, acceleration clauses would apply. Acceleration meant the entire balance due immediately. I sat down at my dining table and spread the pages out like evidence. February 14th. That date again. I opened my laptop and pulled up my archived emails from that week. Compliance Summit, Chicago. Hyatt Regency O'Hare. I found the conference check-in timestamp 8:42 a.m. I found a selfie one of my colleagues had taken in the lobby at 9:03 a.m. The notarization on the loan, 9:18 a.m. Columbus time. I zoomed in on the scanned signature. The C in Calloway was too wide. My real signature tightens toward the end. This one flared. Whoever practiced it hadn't noticed that detail. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Instead, there was a stillness I recognized from work, the moment when a compliance irregularity shifts into confirmed fraud. I called Huntington Bank directly and asked to speak to their fraud department. The investigator who answered introduced himself as Daniel Mercer. His voice was careful. "Ms. Calloway, are you disputing the validity of your guarantor signature? Yes. Do you believe the signature was forged? Yes. A pause. Do you have documentation placing you elsewhere on the date of signing? Yes. His tone changed slightly. Then I recommend you come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call Tessa. Instead, I drove past 842 East Hudson Street that evening. The lights inside were dimmer than they had been in the grand opening photos. A spring clearance sign hung in the window. I counted only 2 customers inside. The building looked tired. I sat in my car across the street and watched for 10 minutes. If sales were already lagging, the pressure on that loan would be increasing. And if the loan collapsed, they needed someone solvent to absorb it. Me. I drove home and began assembling a folder. Boarding passes, flight receipts, hotel invoice, badge scan log from the summit, email timestamps. I also printed 5 samples of my actual signature from prior legal documents, my lease agreement, my employment contract, my passport application. Side by side, the differences were subtle but undeniable. The next morning, before leaving for the bank, I checked my phone. There was a text from my father. We need to talk. You're overcomplicating this. Overcomplicating. I stared at the word for a long time. He didn't deny anything. He didn't ask what I had found. He simply assumed I would adjust myself back into compliance. I didn't reply. Instead, I placed the forged documents into a manila folder and drove downtown. As I walked into the bank's corporate office on East Broad Street, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not anger, authority. Because whatever they believed about me, that I would avoid conflict, that I would protect family at my own expense, they had miscalculated one thing. I work in risk. And this wasn't emotional anymore. It was evidence. The fraud department office was quieter than I expected. No raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just a glass-walled conference room and a long table with a legal pad placed precisely in front of each chair. Daniel Mercer looked younger than I'd imagined. Early 40s, neutral tie, calm eyes. He didn't waste time. Walk me through your timeline, he said. So I did. Chicago, February 14th, 6:10 a.m. departure, 8:42 a.m. conference check-in, 9:03 a.m. photo in the lobby. Digital timestamps attached. He compared the times to the notarization. 9:18 a.m. Columbus. That's physically impossible, he said quietly. He examined the signatures next. Mine, the forged one, back and forth. He didn't comment at first, just circled small details with a pen. This one hesitates here, he said, finally pointing at the tail of the Y. Yours doesn't. I nodded. He leaned back slightly. Do you suspect the borrower had access to your identifying documents? Yes. Yes. Do you wish to pursue a formal fraud claim? There it was, the fork in the road. Once I said yes, there would be no quiet family resolution, no closed-door apology, no rewriting. Yes, I said. He didn't react emotionally. He simply wrote something down. We'll freeze disbursements pending investigation. That may trigger immediate financial consequences for the business. I understand. He studied me for a moment. This could result in criminal exposure. I understand. He slid a form across the table. Affidavit of forgery. My name at the top. A blank line at the bottom. I signed it slowly, carefully, the way I always sign. Clean. Undeniable. When I stepped outside, the late morning sun on East Broad felt almost too bright. My phone vibrated in my hand before I even reached my car. Tessa. I let it ring. Then another call. My father. Then my mother. I answered the 4th call. My father's voice came through tight and controlled. What did you do? I told the truth, I said. You've jeopardized everything. I didn't sign that loan. Silence. Then softer, more dangerous. You're part of this family. Not you were. Not you are loved. Part of this. I didn't respond. You're going to destroy your sister, he said. No one had asked what this could have done to me. That was the quiet arithmetic of it. Destroy her, or bankrupt me. When I arrived at work, I found an email waiting from my mother. Subject line: disappointed. She wrote 3 paragraphs about loyalty, about sacrifice, about how Tessa had taken risks for all of us. At the bottom, one sentence stood alone. If you can't stand with your sister, maybe you shouldn't stand with us at all. That was the first time the word disowned floated through my mind. That evening, they made it explicit. My father called and asked me to come to the house. When I arrived, the air inside felt rehearsed. My aunt was there. My uncle. Tessa standing near the fireplace. This isn't how family handles problems, my father said. Family doesn't forge signatures, I replied. Tessa laughed. You're being dramatic. I was in Chicago. You think a timestamp proves something, she shot back. I watched her face carefully. She believed proximity to confidence would win. My father stepped forward. If you continue this, don't come back here. My mother didn't meet my eyes. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. You're not welcome, my father said finally. There it was. Clean. Final. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my coat and walked out of the house I had grown up in. As I pulled into my apartment parking garage later that night, my phone buzzed again. A notification from Huntington Bank. Loan status updated under fraud review. Disbursements suspended, which meant something else. If the business was already strained, the freeze would tighten it immediately. They had calculated that I would stay silent. They had not calculated that documentation beats intimidation. And for the first time in months, I realized something important. The leverage was no longer theirs. It had shifted. Quietly. The calls started the next morning. Not angry this time. Panicked. I woke up to 3 voicemails and a text from my father that simply read, "Call me. Now." When I didn't respond, my mother called. Her voice was no longer rehearsed. The bank froze everything she said. Payroll. Vendor accounts. Tessa can't access operating funds. I sat on the edge of my bed listening to the soft hum of traffic outside my window. That's what happens when documents are disputed, I said. You didn't have to make it public, she whispered. Public? The investigation wasn't public yet, which meant the pressure was already inside the business. Tessa called next. Her voice was brittle. They're asking for original signing footage, she said. Security cameras. Witness statements. They're treating this like a crime. It is a crime, I replied. Silence. Then something colder. You're ruining my life over paperwork. Over paperwork. I thought of the word guarantor. I thought of $240,000. I didn't sign it, I said again. She hung up. By noon, Daniel Mercer called to confirm that the internal review had escalated to the bank's legal division. There are inconsistencies with the notary log, he said. Time entries don't align. Ellen Parrish. Church friend. Volunteer notary. The network was tightening. I spent that afternoon meeting with an attorney recommended by a colleague, Grant Holloway, White Collar Defense and Financial Litigation Office on Gay Street. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands. You understand this may not stay private, he said. If the bank refers it, it becomes prosecutable. I understand. And if they argue you gave implied consent, I was in Chicago. He nodded. Documentation is your advantage. He suggested one more step. If this escalates, control the narrative before they do. I knew what he meant. My parents' church was hosting its 40th anniversary banquet that Saturday at the Hyatt Regency Columbus. 300 attendees, local sponsors, business leaders. Tessa scheduled to receive recognition for entrepreneurial leadership. My father was chairing the event. Public space, public praise, public narrative. If the story broke without context, it would become about a bitter daughter sabotaging her sister. If facts entered the room first, the tone would shift. I didn't plan a speech. I don't give speeches. Instead, I assembled a thin folder, certified deed copy, loan package with signature comparison, flight records, conference badge timestamp, fraud affidavit receipt. Grant advised me not to dramatize. Facts, he said. Nothing else. On Friday evening, my father left a voicemail I didn't expect. His voice sounded older. "You don't have to come tomorrow," he said. "It would just make things harder." Harder for who I stared at the ceiling in the dark after the call ended. I wasn't going for confrontation. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going because something had already been rewritten about me in that room. Disloyal, unstable, overreacting. If silence continues long enough, it becomes truth. Saturday afternoon, I drove downtown. The Hyatt Regency ballroom entrance was draped in white fabric and soft lighting. Valets lined the curb. The city air carried that early summer humidity that clings to skin. Inside the room was already filling. My father stood near the podium greeting donors. Tessa wore a fitted navy dress, polished, composed. When she saw me, her smile flickered for half a second. "You're not supposed to be here?" she said quietly as I approached. "I was invited," I replied. She glanced toward our father. I took a seat near the middle of the room. I didn't bring anyone with me. I didn't need to. The program listed her award near the end of the evening, which meant I would have time. Time to watch. Time to listen to the way my father described sacrifice. Time to hear my mother clap. And time to decide exactly when truth enters a room. As the lights dimmed and the first speaker approached the podium, my phone buzzed once more. A text from Daniel Mercer. "Legal review confirmed. There are material irregularities. This will proceed." I turned my phone face down. Because whatever happened next wouldn't require volume, just evidence. The ballroom lights softened as the final segment began. Gold tablecloths, low floral centerpieces, the quiet clink of silverware being set aside as attention shifted toward the stage. My father stepped up to the podium. He looked steady. Polished suit. Notes arranged in precise order. Tonight, he began, we celebrate vision, commitment, the courage to build something that uplifts community. Applause. He spoke about resilience, about entrepreneurship, about how family stands together in times of growth. Tessa stood near the stage, hands folded lightly in front of her, composed, controlled. The same expression she wore in her promotional photos. When her name was called Young Entrepreneur of the Year, the room rose in applause. She accepted the plaque with both hands, smiled, waited for the flash of cameras. Then my father added one more line, and none of this would have been possible without sacrifice. He let the word hang. I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough movement to register. I walked toward the side aisle microphone near table 12. The carpet muted my steps. My father noticed me halfway there. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. The event coordinator glanced at me, uncertain. "I won't take long," I said quietly. The microphone amplified less than I expected. 300 faces turned in small increments. I didn't look at Tessa first. I looked at the projector screen still displaying her name. "I have documents that relate to the property at 842 East Hudson Street," I said. Silence moved faster than sound. My father stepped toward the stage stairs. "This isn't the time," he said into his handheld mic. I held up a single sheet of paper. "The deed transfer lists me as grantee." Murmurs began low, confused. I walked the printed county record to the event coordinator and asked him calmly to display it. He hesitated. "Please," I said. He handed it to the technician. The screen shifted. 842 East Hudson Street, grantee Marin Calloway. Gasps were small, controlled. My father moved closer to the podium. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. I removed the second document from my folder. February 14th, 9:18 a.m., notarized in Columbus. Then I held up my boarding pass. Same date. Departure 6:10 a.m. Chicago arrival 7:04 a.m. Conference check-in 8:42 a.m. I asked the technician to display the timestamp. 2 documents side by side, 2 cities, 1 person. Physically in one place, legally recorded in another. The room didn't erupt, it contracted. The silence was heavier than applause had been. Tessa's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The confidence drained in small increments like air from something sealed. My father reached for the mic again. "You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't respond. Instead, I placed the loan signature page under the document camera. My real signature from my employment contract appeared beside the forged one from the promissory note. Small differences magnified large on the screen. The M, the Y, precision over emotion. Daniel Mercer stood near the back of the ballroom. He hadn't approached the stage. He didn't need to. His presence was visible enough. Someone near the front whispered, "Is this fraud?" The word moved through the tables. Fraud. Ellen Parrish, the notary, sat 3 tables from the front. Her hands trembled as she looked down at her phone. My mother remained seated. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I didn't say my sister forged it. I didn't say my father orchestrated it. I only let the timestamps exist. My father's voice lost some of its steadiness. "This is a family matter." I looked at him then. "No," I said quietly. "It's a legal one." The difference settled into the room. Legal carries weight. The event coordinator lowered his microphone slowly. Applause did not return. Instead, chairs shifted. Heads leaned together. Sponsors exchanged looks. Tessa's award plaque remained in her hands, but it no longer looked celebratory. It looked misplaced. I stepped away from the microphone. No final statement, no closing line. Just paper placed back into a folder. As I walked toward the exit, no one stopped me. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape sharply against the floor. Then nothing. Silence does more damage than shouting ever could. The ballroom did not erupt after I walked out. It dissolved. That was what Daniel told me later in a short follow-up call the next morning. No shouting, no dramatic scene, just sponsors quietly requesting clarification, a board member asking for documentation, the event coordinator ending the program 15 minutes early due to unforeseen circumstances. The story didn't spread online immediately. It spread in whispers first. By Monday morning, Huntington Bank had formally suspended the loan pending investigation. The freeze became public record within the business community before it ever reached social media. Tessa's Hudson location didn't reopen after that weekend. A small printed notice appeared on the glass door, temporarily closed for administrative review. Administrative. The word looked sterile, taped against brick. Vendor trucks stopped arriving. Inventory shipments were rerouted. The landlord filed a notice of concern regarding lease performance. Commercial landlords move quickly when they sense instability. Within 60 days, the For Lease sign replaced her boutique logo. The investigation expanded beyond the bank. The notary log showed irregular sequencing. Timestamps overwritten. Witness signature lines incomplete. Ellen Parrish retained private counsel within a week. No one was arrested. Not yet. But formal inquiry letters were issued. That was enough. Church leadership released a short statement emphasizing integrity and transparency. My father quietly stepped down from his chair position. The wording cited personal matters. Sponsors distanced themselves without making accusations. Public association is fragile when documentation exists. At home, the silence from my parents was complete for 8 days. Then an email arrived from my mother. Subject line, "Please." It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. She wrote that Tessa had been under pressure. That expansion required creative solutions, that no one believed it would escalate this way. She said they assumed I would understand. Understand what? That my financial future was collateral. At the bottom she wrote, "Families survive mistakes when they choose forgiveness." She never used the word fraud. She never used the word forged. She never used the word signature. I didn't reply. A week later, Tessa posted a vague statement online about betrayal from within and learning who truly supports you. Comments divided quietly. Some defended her ambition, others asked about the documents. She disabled replies within hours. Financial consequences followed faster than emotional ones. Without the Hudson expansion, her primary short north location struggled under existing debt. Revenue reports had been optimistic projections, not sustained numbers. Once lenders reviewed actual cash flow, restructuring talks began. Retail margins do not tolerate scandal. My father called once more. Late. After 10 p.m. His voice was steady again but thinner. "You didn't have to do it publicly." I sat on my couch, lights off, city skyline faint beyond my window. "I didn't say anything that wasn't documented," I replied. "You embarrassed us." The word landed gently. Embarrassment was the frame he chose. Not liability, not crime. Embarrassment. I didn't argue. We ended the call without resolution. Professionally, the situation stabilized faster than I expected. Because I had filed the fraud affidavit early, my personal credit exposure was contained. The bank's legal department formally removed my guarantor status pending investigation. My credit score corrected within weeks. At work, I didn't discuss any of it. But something shifted. My director pulled me aside one afternoon. "I heard you handled a complex documentation dispute recently," she said carefully. "You stayed calm." I nodded. Compliance requires that. 3 months later, I was offered a promotion to senior compliance officer. It wasn't dramatic. Just a meeting. A new title. A modest salary adjustment. Stability returned quietly. Socially, invitations from extended family decreased. Holiday texts became shorter. The family group thread went silent. Distance formed not through explosion, but through absence. And I realized something as the weeks passed. No one asked how I was doing. They asked whether it could have been handled differently, as if tone mattered more than truth. But truth has its own gravity. It doesn't need volume. It simply waits for documentation. 6 months later, the building on East Hudson no longer carried any trace of my name. The fraud investigation was still technically open, but the bank had completed its internal findings. My guarantor status was formally voided. The lien was removed from my credit file. The documentation trail remained intact in legal archives where it belonged. I moved in early October. Not far. Just north Dublin, Ohio. A smaller condo, second floor, overlooking a stretch of trees that turned copper when the weather shifted. 32 minutes from downtown without traffic. 25 if the highway was clear. I signed that lease carefully. The M tight. The Y clean. Work settled into a steady rhythm. Policy reviews. Risk mitigation reports. Vendor audits. I found comfort in systems that required verification. In procedures that didn't depend on loyalty. My title changed. My responsibilities widened. My salary adjusted just enough to make breathing easier. No celebration, just progression. I drove past 842 East Hudson once in November. Not intentionally, just a route I hadn't taken in months. The windows were papered over. A realtor's placard leaned crookedly against the brick. The interior lights were off. I didn't slow down. At Thanksgiving, I stayed home. I roasted a small chicken, set one place at my dining table. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was stable. My phone lit up once that day. A group message from extended relatives. A photo of my parents' table. fewer chairs than before. I muted the thread. The case moved towards civil mediation in December. No charges had been filed publicly. Negotiations were ongoing. Insurance claims were being reviewed. Attorneys speaking to attorneys. It was procedural. What had once felt like betrayal now felt like paperwork. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt precise. There is a difference between revenge and correction. Correction is colder. It leaves less noise. One evening in early winter, I deleted the family group chat entirely. No announcement, no final message. Just a press of the screen and the thread disappeared. Nothing dramatic happened afterward. No one showed up at my door. No apology arrived. No reconciliation request followed. Just space. And in that space, something unfamiliar formed. Clarity. Family, I realized, isn't defined by who claims you when things are smooth. It's defined by who refuses to risk your future for their ambition. I no longer needed them to admit what they had done. The documentation had already done that. Some endings don't arrive with slammed doors. They arrive with signatures. Clean, undeniable, and final. When I look back at those 24 hours, the disowning, the mocking, the sudden panic, I don't remember the volume of their voices. I remember the stillness in my own. There's something unsettling about realizing the people who raised you were willing to let your name carry their risk. Not because they hated you, but because they assumed you would absorb it. Sometimes betrayal isn't dramatic. It's administrative. A signature placed where yours should have been. A decision made without asking. A narrative built before you knew you were part of it. If I had stayed silent, the story about me would have solidified. Disloyal, difficult, overreacting. Instead, I let the document speak. And once truth enters a room, it doesn't need to shout. If you've ever had to choose between protecting a relationship and protecting yourself, I'd be curious what you chose and why. Wherever you're listening from, I'm grateful you stayed through this with me. And if stories like this resonate with you, you're welcome to stay for the next one.